Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Alex's Afternoon Art Show. Today we are doing another Mortal Kombat drawing. It's been a little while since I've done one of these. And we're drawing Ermac. So it's going to be a bit more of a challenging one because, as you may know, Ermac is one of those characters with a very inconsistent design and many inconsistent design qualities. So this is going to be a bit challenging. I already have my base sketch and everything done, obviously, so that means that we've got the general idea of the design already in, so I will have a bit of talking to do about that, because as I have tried to do with all of these Mortal Kombat designs so far, I have tried to come to some sort of middle ground between a lot of the different designs and sort of effectively create a median design, something which has generally a lot of the better qualities, in my opinion, of some of the other designs, and then brings in some new qualities as well. And generally tries to balance out some of the more negative qualities of those designs. So yeah, anyways, I will roll the intro and then I will be back to talk a little bit more. So yeah. So yeah, this is what we have. So, as I mentioned before, this is a more challenging one. So, one of the things that I wanted to immediately sort of start with is the mummy thing. I'm not a fan of the mummy thing. It's a big element of a lot of Ermac's designs in that they add in a lot of these sort of, and it's because he's supposed to have this sort of sorcerer quality to him, and it's something which I have tried to emphasize here. Now some of that comes down to the pose, but what I have tried to do is I've tried to sort of incorporate some of these mummy elements in ways that don't make him look quite so much like a mummy, and instead sort of bring out the sorcerer thing a little bit more, while also still keeping the ninja thing going, because that is, at the end of the day, he is supposed to be a ninja. So, let's take it from the top. So I've given him this sort of cloak that sort of hangs over his shoulders, and that, to me, incorporates some of the more kind of sorcerer elements while also still keeping the ninja thing, because with this sort of little cloak that he's got on, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing was the sort of freedom of movement, because that's a thing that whenever, if he's a ninja, he's going to need freedom of movement. And as a note on that, I wanted to keep it to being, again, loose and flowing. That's what he's got in terms of a lot of these different little bits of fabric that are hanging off of him, like the wraps on his arms, or the bits of his robe that are sort of looser here. And again, things that would sort of accentuate the movements, things that would, again, like ninja clothing is typically loose, in a sense, kind of baggy. So we're going with that, and we're trying to also keep him looking like a Mortal Kombat ninja. In a sense of where he's generally got a bit more sort of, again, he's got his arms exposed, he's got sort of bits of his face are clearly visible, all this stuff. So yeah, let's take it from the top, the head. Something which I should actually note as well is I will have to apply some sort of wrinkling to his skin on his arms, because I have it on his body and on his face, but not on his arms for whatever reason. I guess I just forgot to do that. But yeah, so let's start from the head. Let's get in there and have a look at this. So, the mask is usually what I start with, if memory is serving me correctly, on whenever I'm describing these bits and pieces. So the mask here, I generally took a lot of this from Mortal Kombat 1, because I like how his mask looks in that. The sort of pointed edges and everything, and that also stands out here quite differently from a lot of the masks that I've designed for the different Mortal Kombat ninjas so far, is that they have generally got sort of fairly... generally got sort of very different looking masks, which I'm happy with so far. Again, Scorpion has the sort of skull mask, Sub-Zero has the sort of techie mask, and then Kitana has a more opulent mask, Melina has a very sort of ragged mask, Reptile has this sort of scaled mask, and then Ermac has a sort of jagged pointed mask. Now, we'll see how I feel about that as I'm going. I might change some bits of that as I'm going, because I like how it sort of has this long base to it, that it sort of comes down below his chin a little bit. And then obviously the way that the hood sort of frames it, I like as well. So I suppose I may as well note it here because it's on the neck and it's on all the rest of the design. There is these bits of sort of wrapping, which I've got along his chest here underneath the robe, and then along his arm here, and into the sort of the wrist on this arm, and then over the shoulder of this arm, and then along his neck here as well. And it's also along his trousers. So it's something which I have decided to incorporate as one of those, again, as I said, the mummy elements. But I have done it in, I believe, a way where it still has the ninja thing to it, and it's also still got the sorcerer thing to it, where it's not losing too much of either. Because I feel like they can get a little too excessive when it comes to the wraps on Ermac. A lot of the time, they often put a little bit too much on him, and so he just looks like a mummy, which I don't want him to look like here, because he is still kind of ghoulish. Again, you can even see with the way that I've designed his face here, there's all these wrinkles and everything. He's still got the sort of glowing eyes. And the mist, this is an element which I've put in as well. He's got these sort of smoke emanating from his eyes and his hands. Again, magic and all the sorcery and all that stuff. So I'm not really sure what inspired the design of the cloak here at the top, with the sort of stripe and then the red along the edges and then going through. So his design is obviously going to be very red and black. A lot of his more recent designs emphasize the black a lot more, but I wanted to bring back a little bit more of the red into it. He'll have bits of brown and stuff like that. Like the boots will be a sort of a reddy brown, and I think I might make something else that as well. I might have to incorporate that somewhere else, because otherwise those boots are going to stand out too much. Maybe the boots should just be black. Be a lot of black then. I'll have to have a think about that as I'm going. The colours aren't something I have to worry too much about just yet, but obviously that is a big part of these designs because they are the colour-coded ninjas. Anyways, the bracer here there's not much to talk about. It's just sort of I decided to put in something akin to the sort of Mortal Kombat 3 kind of wrist bracers that they all have, and then the sort of more arm wrapping here where bits of it are a bit loose, and so that's sort of falling down outside of the wrapping here. It's just sort of falling down a little bit, and I think that looks a bit more interesting. I decided to give him one of these sort of big, thicker belts that they have in, I believe they have these belts in Mortal Kombat 3. The sort of thicker belts, I forget. It's been a while since I did this base sketch, so I don't actually know where I pulled the belt from specifically. But this is this is supposed to be deliberately similar to a type of belt that the palette swap ninjas had in one of the games. I forget which one it is. I've brought back the cross-hatched, sort of quilted robe from 2 is what I've gone for here, because I think technically Ermac's first appearance is in 2, I think. I forget. Again, it's been a while since I did this base sketch, and the research was fresh in my mind then, but it isn't now. Of where, yeah, again, the robe sort of, it's the 2 sort of piece robe at the front, and then it falls down in the single bit at the bottom. However, I've also got these bits, the sort of side wrapping here, so in theory you should probably be able to see like a middle piece here, but you can maybe say that that's part of the bit that's falling down over here. Again, the idea is that the robe is loose on one arm, so it's emphasizing, you're seeing a bit more of his body in that sense. I tried to give him a design which in parts emphasized the fact that he's one of the skinnier ninjas, but also didn't make him look too wiry. Again, like the cloak sort of masks the shape of his shoulders a little bit, like it de-emphasizes the shape of his shoulders, makes him seem a little bit broader. And it's the same with the hood and everything like that. He's got a loose hood, and that makes his head, that sort of hides the sort of narrowness of his head and sort of narrowness of his shoulders and stuff like that. But it's sort of, again, it just gives him a different shape of where it's sort of broad and then down into thin, and then the legs are quite thin as well. And so again, he's got a lot of robe going on here, so that sort of, again, as I say, it masks the shape of him a little bit, makes him seem a little bit bigger than he is. Again, so yeah, you've got these bits that sort of flick out over the sides, and they'd sort of cover down a little bit below, and then you've got this front bit, the front flap that comes down to his knees, and then you've got these side bits here, which are a further extension of these side bits, and they kind of come down. These are fully black, these ones. The boots still have to have the ninja toe shape in them, even though these are more traditional boots, just with some belting on them. I said they kind of still have to have the ninja toe shape, so what I've done is I put a little bit of design along the side, and so that then comes down around where the toe is. So it's still vaguely got the ninja toe shape. I'm stretching a little bit to include it at this point, because so far they've all had it, and so they all kind of need to have it. To my, as far as I would say, that is a very distinct part of a ninja design. Is the sort of, it's a very particular part of ninja design. Is that kind of odd toe shape to the shoes, and so I've chosen to 100% of the time include that as part of the boots in these designs, even though Mortal Kombat ninjas don't really have it a lot of the time. Rare is it, to my understanding? Well, I don't want to say it's rare, but I don't see it a lot of the time in a lot of these designs that they have the toe shape. But I've chosen to include it as a sort of, again, a pillar of the design for whatever reason. Same with the masks, and same with the sort of shape of the robe being the two primary pieces, and then whatever else is underneath. There's only one character so far that has two characters with the sort of and that's Kitana and Melina. The female ninjas obviously don't have this. They have slightly different rules in that sense. With them, the sort of primary facts of their design is generally no hood, but not exclusively no hood. We'll get to that when we get to it. But yeah, generally the female ninjas have some different design sense in that respect. But yeah, Ermac is an odd one, and he's very inconsistent, as I mentioned. His design changes all the time, and a lot of the time, not for the better. Not for the better, a lot of the time. But I think the Mortal Kombat 1 design is pretty decent, and so I've pulled a lot from that and sort of made some changes, and again, as I say, put a lot more red in there, because again, Ermac's color is red. It's not black, it's red. Now granted, the background here is probably going to have to be green. Or no, I can maybe get away with it being red. I don't know. I'll have to have a think about what I'm going to do with the background, because they're reasonably consistent with the backgrounds that I've been doing so far. But we'll see. Anyways, is there anything else I need to cover before I just start? I don't know that there is. I've already been talking for nearly 14 minutes. So yeah, I think I will probably just start doing these details, and then I'll be back to do the colours, and I'll have some more talking to do there, because I need to sort of separate out some of these sections. I'll have to think about the boots, because they might have to be black, because I don't know that there's anywhere else I can really fit in that reddy brown without it sticking out, because having the red on red here is not going to quite work. Anyways, I'll have to think about that. I'll talk about it in a while. But yeah, I'll do these details, and then I will be back to discuss the colors. So yeah. that's the following day. So yeah, I decided to take my time with all the detail stuff. So I'll get in and I'll start telling you a little bit about what I did. So I changed his face a little bit, just to demonstrate. I will show you. So I furrowed his brows and I made him a little bit angry. I also changed the shape of his eyes a little bit, made the sort of wrinkling on his forehead a little bit more subtle. I applied a bit more wrinkling to his skin and his arms, so that applies more of a sort of a, as I mentioned before, more of the ghoulish quality to his skin. To do the smoke, and obviously these have they sort of taper and they thin out as they go. I wasn't too worried about the lines here being thick and clean. These ones are a bit messier, a bit fuzzier lines. I don't really mind too much. I applied sort of a preset crosshatch pattern to this. I'm not honestly too keen on it. I don't know if I like how it looks all that much. Sort of preset pattern I'm not quite so into. I think like it looks all right. I think it'll look better once the colors and everything are on. I think I'll probably make it subtler as I go. I'll probably lower the opacity on it once I have all those colors laid in. But for now I'll leave it like this. I'll have a think about it. A lot of my colors obviously I'm going to have a think about. I think for the background I'm going to do a light sort of a yellowy green in the middle, and then that'll split out into a red, into a dark red. And that's what I'll go for. I will probably make these boots black, just so that your eyes aren't getting drawn too much to the boots, because otherwise I feel like these will draw your eye. I want your eye to sort of be drawn to the red mostly, so that's why there's again little bits of red trimming on things like this. His cape on the inside is red, and then the outside is black, because it's this sort of double layered thing. It's almost like a poncho even. Of course, this double layered thing of where the upper part is black, and then the inner part is red. And so yeah, you've got this sort of inside bit here where it's all red, and then you've got this sort of outer bit which is a little shorter, and that sits out here where that's black still. And then you've got the sort of double layered primary robe piece of where that sort of, again, it falls down around the waist, and then this is still the cross-hatched stuff. And then you've got this sort of extra little flap which hangs down towards the boots, which is then black. And again, the idea of all these extra sort of layers and all these different bits sort of falling down and all this extra fabric, it does sort of add to the kind of, it makes it look a bit more like a sorcerer. Because generally whenever you have a sorcerer character, they're typically wearing sort of baggy robes, stuff like that. So having him in that stuff does sort of again emphasize the sort of sorcerer thing. And yeah, even having like the bits of wraps and things like that around him. I don't want it to, again, as I mentioned a billion times at this point, I don't want it to look too much like a mummy. And so yeah, I wanted to keep the sort of wraps to a minimum, but I still wanted them there, so I have it sort of as an underlying part of his design. The idea being that he's got sort of that underneath a lot of his robes, so that it's just sort of there as a additional thing. Again, like he's got it along his legs, he's got it along his arm, and along the sort of top of his upper body, into his neck and stuff like that. So something which I forgot to mention is that the hood, the sort of particular design of the hood, it comes from Mortal Kombat X, of where it's got this sort of red trim around it. But obviously in that design he's got more of this sort of coat thing, of where it's like this long sort of this long sort of one-piece coat is sort of almost what his design looks like in Mortal Kombat X. This, if anything, it probably pulls more from the Mortal Kombat 1 design, because you can see a lot more of his skin. Because yeah, you can see a lot more of his body underneath. I'd say the closest merger in terms of what this design is probably Mortal Kombat 1 meets a little bit of his alternate Deception costume. Because his primary Deception costume is the sort of the big baggy robe, but the secondary one is it's a big scarf where he's got hair or sort of out in a bandana, and then it's still just the sort of primary normal ninja robe underneath. So if anything, it's sort of that meets Mortal Kombat 1 to a degree, and a little bit of Mortal Kombat X in there. Even though I quite like his secondary Mortal Kombat 9 design with the hood and the mask. I didn't use much of that in this. It's just sort of I just sort of feel like it doesn't mesh with the design that we've got here. Of the designs, I'm not so. I feel like I'm a little less confident in this one than I was in some of the other ones. I quite enjoyed. I'm quite happy with pretty much all the other designs I did. This is one of the ones of where I think Ermac is just very hard to work with as a character. He's got a lot of different elements, and each of those elements require quite a bit of representation in the design. The fact that he's ninja, the fact that he's a sort of a ghoul or a mummy, if you will. He's a resurrected sort of character. The fact that he's a sorcerer, the fact that he's got all these other elements in there and all this stuff. Like, one of the things that is often a part of Ermac's designs, which I didn't include here, is he's usually got a bit of jewellery or something on him. He's got sort of decorations. He has a pattern, a symbol that is usually depicted on his design, which isn't here in this one. And it's just because I don't have the space for it at this point. Like, I've got so much else going on in this design that it's just infeasible to fit that in there as well. And it's not the same as with a lot of the other ninjas where they've got one or two permanent fixtures of their design. It's usually their color. It's usually their color and the general sort of design of their mask. That's about it. Like, again, it's usually the color is normally the hard and fast rule. Like in the case of the male ninjas, at least, it's usually the color, the design of their mask. That's kind of it, and the mask changes. It does change often. So realistically speaking, the color is the only hard and fast rule. And then they've got their sort of constituent elements, which you can choose to represent or not. Oftentimes in these designs, they're sort of represented, sort of not. So, and then when you get to the female ninjas, it's typically their hair. Their hairstyle is the sort of one of the big rules. Is sort of Katana usually has more sort of more tidy hairstyles. Melina has messier hairstyles, stuff like that. Then their color, because again, a lot of the other elements of their design very changeable. And so that's ultimately the thing with the ninjas, is it's predominantly their color and then a few small characteristics. Ermac, he has so many individual little characteristics that are hard to represent when all put together, so you can often wind up with a very busy design. I feel like I've tried to keep this design as simple as possible, and it's still quite busy. And so that's the thing, I didn't get to include any of those symbols or any of those bits of sort of decoration in that sense to his design, because there's just already so much going on here. But yeah, so I think I will carry on. I think I will do these colors, and then I'll be back to introduce the painted shading and all that stuff. So yeah, is there anything else I needed to mention beforehand? I sort of went over everything when it comes to the colors, and then I went over a lot more with the design and all these things and some of the design choices that I made. So yeah, something which I suppose I'm going to be doing here, which is a little different than what I've been doing with some of the other ninjas, is that when I'm coloring him, I'm going to be just sort of making the color decisions myself. I haven't actually had any reference open the whole time I've been drawing this. I did for the base sketch, obviously, just so that again I knew what I was doing, and I knew what elements I was pulling from, and so on and so forth. But then when it comes to the colors, I'm just sort of pulling that for myself, because again, the ninjas, they all have their colors are easy enough to think of. The red that I'm probably going to use is maybe going to skew slightly more orange, maybe. I'll see what I do with the red, because there's a lot more red in this design than you would normally get in a lot of Ermac's designs these days. So we'll see how it looks, because I might have to change that. Anyways, I'll do these colors and then I'll be back. So yeah. Alright, that's our colors done. So, as I mentioned, a lot more red in this Ermac design than you might be used to in the modern day. So, I was originally just going to make all of the black the same shade, but I chose to put in a dark grey for the wraps because I felt like it would be more appropriate, because especially down for here, there'd be far too much sort of, again, it'd just be all black against black, so it just sort of merged together a little too much. So I chose to separate those colors a little bit to keep the sort of some of the designs a bit consistent. Because his primary color is red, I chose to still incorporate that into the mask, because all of the characters so far have had their primary color as part of their mask, as well as accenting colors along there. So here again, I chose to keep the accenting colors of the silver and the black, but also the red. There's a primary red stripe in the middle of the mask. I applied a little bit of an inner glow to the smoke that emanates from his eyes and hands, and so that just, again, it's quite subtle in places, but it just applies a sort of a stronger, more neon green around the edges, and I like how that looks. I tampered around with sort of adding a few different types of green to the edges. I thought about maybe adding an outer glow, but I don't think it should have an outer glow because this is just smoke. So I don't think it should glow, but I think just having the inner glow makes it seem like, again, it sort of has a darker edge to it at least. And I'm happy with that. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to change the pattern too much, if at all, on the robe. I might change it during this because of the paints. The paints might not be super clear with the pattern on, so I might lower it for the sake of just making it more readable. In that sense, but we'll see. I might not have to. It might be visible enough on its own, so we'll see. Yeah, what's our lighting environment gonna be? So I'm gonna have the darkest over here, lightest over here. I'm not sure what our color palette's going to be. I'm gonna have to think about that. I mean, most of the color palettes on these have been fairly consistent with sort of a purple to yellow sort of scale for the shading. But that's not necessarily been the lighting that I've been using for the most part. We'll see. I might have to think about it. I might have to look for a color palette that has the sort of red and maybe a hint of green in there. For the sake of keeping things consistent with what we already have in terms of the colors. Yeah, it would probably have to be red and green. And that was very similar to the color palette I used on Reptile, so I might try and look for something a bit different, because yeah, I don't want to wind up with the same color palette twice. So, anyways, I'll probably just keep moving for the sake of keeping things going, because I have been doing a lot of talking on this one. So I'll probably just try and keep moving, do these paints, and then I'll be back to introduce the detailed shading, the light line, and all those last few bits. So yeah, anyways, I'll continue. Alright, so that's our paints done. I feel like I've got a decent sort of lighting setup here with the paints. I had to sort of skew our lighter color a bit yellow in places, because like you can see here that this has skewed a bit yellow, even though there's a slight greeny tinge to it. So I've used a bit of a yellowier green. It would have been a bit further down. This would have been about here-ish. Would have been more of the color that I used for a lot of this stuff. So it still has a greeny tinge, but it's not so far in the green territory that it sort of gets messy. The color correction with the gradient maps and stuff like that will bring the green out a bit more, so don't need to worry about that just yet. It's nothing to worry about too much, for now at least. I was thinking about sort of applying more of an aggressive green hue around the hands and the head a little bit more, but I feel like the smoke looks a bit more ethereal if it doesn't actually really affect things too much lighting wise. That looks a bit more interesting to me, at least. If it's sort of not really being affected all that much by outside light, and it isn't affecting much by light. It looks a bit more odd in that sense, and mystical. And I think it just looks better as flatter. I think the smoke looks better whenever it's sort of when it is unaffected, and as I say, when it isn't affecting much. I think that just looks a little better here. So yeah. Is there anything I really need to go into here before I just start? Because the detailed shading isn't going to be like anything too crazy. I just sort of need to be a bit careful that I don't. Just sort of need to be a bit careful that I don't shade any of the smoke, because that's obviously it's the same bloody layer, or it's inside the colors. So yeah, I probably should have thought about that before I had just done that outside of the color folder, but you know, well, we're here now anyways, so it's just not, it's not worth moving it, because then I'd have to erase around some of these extra colors and stuff like that otherwise would go outside of it, but it's not worth it to fix that. So this is what we're dealing with at the moment. Yeah, so what have I got to do? I've got to do the detail shading, I've got to do the light line, and I've got to do the first gradient map. Now I have a color palette selected. It's obviously it's green and red, but it's a different green and red color palette than what Reptile had, because Reptile's red skewed a bit more orange and sort of browny kind of color, because that fit his color palette a bit more. Here the red is a bit sort of purplier, because that's a bit more in tone with the sort of weird mystical look. And our red sort of sits dead middle in the color palette, so that should sort of bring out a lot of the reds that we've already got in here. And then yeah, the sort of purple should skew the edges a little bit more of the background, so the background is a bit more of a blended color, because the red and the green are not quite meshing together all that well in the background. So hopefully our gradient maps sort of clean that up a little bit, because I'm just not a big fan of how that looks. Anyways, what else have I had to do? Yeah, I'm just sort of hoping all that stuff works out. We'll see how all that sort of stuff works. I don't have to do too much work with the detailed shading, so the rest of this should be pretty quick. I was thinking of using a weird light line color, but I think the white will just do us fine. I don't think we need to do anything crazy. Because as well, if we want to keep it consistent with a lot of the other Mortal Kombat drawings, then I should use a white light line, because I've used a white light line on all the other ones, so that's the thing. I should just sort of stick with that for now. Anyways, I'll do these detailed. I'll do the detailed shading, the light line, and the first gradient map, and then I'll be back to wrap up. So yeah. Alright, that is our detailed shading, our light line, and our first gradient map done. I also applied a glow to his eyes. It is a lot more obvious with the gradient map on. With it off, it's somewhat subtle. You wouldn't really know. This is, well, I don't want to say you wouldn't know, but yeah, it's not the most sort of obvious thing in the world. You just maybe sort of think that there's that's a shading decision more than a glow. But yeah, anyways, I applied that and I applied a little bit of outer glow on it so that it gets a little bit darker at the edges, or it gets a little bit it's pale in the middle and then it sort of gets darker at the edge. Not even darker, but more vivid at the edge. So then I made this a hard light layer, lowered the opacity, and so that made that a little bit nicer looking. So the gradient map that I've gone for is, our primary one at least, is a soft light at a high opacity. And as you can see, I went for a hard sort of blend here on the colors of this gradient map. Predominantly because I didn't want the sort of the magic mist to become too yellow, because there's a very easy way of it becoming too yellow. That can very easily happen when you're doing these sorts of things, especially when you're working with those kinds of colors. So I had to keep the brightest color green, and then the second brightest color also kind of green, but it's a slightly dimmer, yellower green, and then we move right into red, pretty much. Then that moves pretty much immediately into red, and then into the sort of darker red, then into pinkier, darker red again. But our brightest red is only slightly orangey, so again, it still sort of keeps all the redness of everything we got going on here, but we do have something of a kind of a browny color palette here going on. I suppose it's becoming more Mortal Kombat X by the second, by that metric. But anyways, I will finish off these gradient maps. I don't need that open anymore, so let's make our duplicate. So we want to make this one a luminosity. That will dim things out by quite a bit. This is probably going to want to be low opacity on this. Darker below, and it's more vivid below, so let's go with that, and let's make it like really, really subtle. 15%. Because this does also draw out the sort of glow on the eyes a bit more as well, which is good. We do want that. And so then we're going to want a color burn. Let's put that one up. Let's bring it up in opacity just so I can see what I'm working with here. We've got a fairly dark color palette, so it's going to be hard to tell how this is going to work. I think we want it above everything, because otherwise everything's too dark. And then we're going to want this one pretty subtle as well. Maybe this one can be 10%. So what I might do, let's have a look, just see, is throw a multiply on there. And then just see, where should that go? Definitely not below everything. Let's make it a multiply layer, and let's make it 10%. It does make things quite a bit darker. Zoom in and see how that looks. It's just sort of darker. I think maybe making it darker isn't an awful idea though, because we do want this to be sort of dark and gloomy. That is kind of the vibe that we want. So I think having the multiply layer, I might maybe just lower it a little bit. Maybe bring it down to 5%. Even that is enough to sort of bring out the eyes a little bit more. But yeah, okay. Contrast is always very useful whenever you're trying to bring out a sort of a lighter shade. So for example, if you want a particular light to come out, as with the eyes on this, making everything else a little bit darker is a good idea. That will sort of bring things out just that little bit extra. So let me grab my texture here, and I'll throw that over the top, and that should then blend nicely once I apply it correctly. So yeah, just as I say, a bit of contrast goes a long way. So let's bring this one up to 25%. Make this look a bit crunchy. I'm probably going to want to lower it a bit from there, but how's that looking? It does disperse our eye glow a tiny bit, but it is just a little bit too crunchy. Bring that down to 20%. It's still got some nice grit to it, because obviously that's what we want. Nice bit of blend to the background. Yeah, that green on the background is just sort of a dull kind of browny yellow now at this point. It's not really green anymore. Right. How does that feel now? 20% works. Yeah, I think 20% works, so that's now a bit grimier looking. So yeah, ultimately the vibe we've got here is pretty grimy, I would say, in terms of our color palette. Is that everything's sort of crunched down into a bit grimier. Our green still stands out very heavily, which is good. I wanted that to stand out because it is, you know, the magic color that we've got here. But yeah, yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, all in all. This one came out a lot better than I was sort of expecting. Not to say that I expected it to look terrible or anything, but I didn't necessarily expect it to come out quite so well. Because this, as I mentioned earlier, this was sort of the design which I was the least convinced on. I think this is a very different. I don't. It's both very different and not very different in a few different ways. I.e., it uses elements which you don't really see in Ermac's design anymore, such as the sort of again the sort of quilted robe. You don't really get that anymore. It's not a thing in most of the ninja designs anymore. Like I sort of gave the impression of it a little bit in Reptiles whenever I did Reptiles design, because that still had like it had the snakeskin patterning, like the croc skin scaled patterning on his robe, which I had to draw in by hand, and that sort of kept the sort of look of that to a degree. And here it's just straight up just the quilted robe. So that's something again you don't really get quite so much anymore. So this is very much, it still very much has a Mortal Kombat 3-ness to it, but it is still kind of modern to a degree. And again, I think the sort of heavy robes and stuff like that, I think he very much does look like a sorcerer more than a ninja, but I think there is still enough ninja in there that it's not completely lost, I think. But I think this is definitely, if you're looking at the scale of Ermac designs from ninja to sorcerer, this one's probably leaning a bit more sorcerer than ninja, I would say. But regardless, I still think it looks cool. Yeah, I think it looks cool, but it is definitely maybe not quite as much what my intention was for these, because the intention was to sort of bring them together a bit more close to the ninja look versus where a lot of them have leaned since then. I mean, Ermac has leaned very much mummy in more recent years. The only one of those I would say which really doesn't do that is Mortal Kombat 1's design, but even then he does still have a lot of mummyisms to him. And even then I've used a lot of that design here. I've used a lot of the elements of that design. Because like I mean, even his design in that game is a lot less it's got a lot less sort of again bits on it than this, but it's got more small parts. Like the hardware of that design, there's quite a lot of it. And when I say that, I mean to say like there's a lot of buckles, there's a lot of little bits of metal and stuff like that on that design, which there isn't here. But yeah. Yeah, I think I'm still happy with it. Again, it's maybe more sorcerer than ninja, more sort of ghoul than I would have expected. But again, he's one of the bad guy ninjas, so it's more interesting, I suppose, for him to have a bit more going on in that respect. He looks a bit more evil, and a lot of that comes down to pose. At the end of the day, it's much easier to make a character look evil with a pose than it is necessarily with design, but ultimately. Anyways, I'm just going to sort of keep rambling here if I don't stop myself. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. Again, not fully what I intended it to be, but you know, this is how things go sometimes. Anyways, I think I'll just wrap up and then I will say goodbye. So yeah, I'll say my outro here. If you liked the video, do whatever it is that you normally do, whether that be liking or not. Or of course, prefer if you liked it, but I can't make you do that. So just, you know, if you would like to do that, it's a thing you can do. It's the same deal if you want to subscribe. Do it, please. I don't want to come across as desperate here. I don't mean to beg. But you know, if you would like to subscribe, if you'd like to know when these videos come out, you can subscribe and ding the bell and all that stuff. And that's below the video, as you know. So yeah. If you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see me draw in the future, you could leave a comment. Also below the video. And yeah, if you're going to do that, do it politely. I'd rather if you did it that way. You don't have to leave a comment, as you know. As with any of this stuff, you don't have to do it, but if you're going to do it, I would rather you did it politely, because I just don't want to have to deal with any of the impoliteness that may come otherwise. And yeah, anyways, if you choose to watch the next video, I'll see you next time. So with all that said, and that was a lot being said, so with all that said, that is us. I'll say goodbye and I will leave you. So, bye-bye.